Hello there. Chatbots and voice and digital assistants are one of the most important tools in today's and especially in tomorrow's world. But who are the people that make them work? The conversation designers. My name is Eran Soroka, head of marketing at CoCoHub Conversational Components. Today we have a special guest from San Francisco, California, Greg Bennett, conversation design lead at Salesforce. Hey, Greg.
Hi.
Nice to have you on our show. First of all, how did you get into conversation design? And is it connected to an unfortunate romantic relationship?
I think you already know the story on this, and I'm happy to tell it. So I started out actually in the field of linguistics. So my background academically is in linguistics for both my undergraduate and graduate work. And I started really delving into a specific piece of linguistics called discourse analysis, which focuses very heavily on the analyzing of language in human interaction and everyday use. And the reason why I focused on that particular part of linguistics is because I got dumped over IM chat when I was a sophomore in college. And the reason why I was really sort of fixated on it was, first of all, when you're 19 and it's your first, major heartbreak, you're kind of like looking for answers. And for me, as a researcher by training and just someone who's very curious and analytical by nature, I wanted to figure out, okay, how is it that, maybe a few days before the actual breakup, I could feel it coming, even though, this other person and we were talking over chat, I could feel him being colder to me, and I couldn't see his face, I couldn't hear his voice. And that's when I really started analyzing language in online and sort of synchronous interaction without, let's say, your voice or your gestures. And it really sort of led me to understanding, okay, users will recruit from every other possible resource they have in an online space to try and convey what we call in linguistics contextualization cues. And essentially, contextualization cues, they are a phenomenon that was discovered by the sociolinguist John Gumpers. He was at UC Berkeley. And he essentially posited that contextualization cues are all of those extra layers of meaning that you give on top of the sort of like dictionary meaning of what you say. So you have the semantic layer, which is the core meaning of what you say, the meaning of the words themselves. But then you have intonation. You have facial gestures, see what my eyebrows are doing, the hand gestures, eye gaze, all of those things,
Even poses.
pitch, intonation, pausing, all of that. Those are all contextualization cues that essentially signal what another linguist named Deborah Tannen calls a meta message to the other, person in the conversation to say, here's some extra meaning, here's how I'm sort of kind of packaging up or setting the framing around whatever it is that I'm saying. So in an online space, you might see something like the playing with the textuality, like you have caps, which makes people think that the other person is yelling. If you send a message and you don't usually use a period at the end of your utterance, and then you use one, that means something. Or if there's italics or emojis, all of those things add the extra layer of contextualization cues to what we're saying. And so to sort of close the loop here, the reason why I felt the breakup coming was because my ex, he started to pare back some of those contextualization cues. He started adding in the period marks and using less emojis and emoticons. And that feels colder because it's essentially creating that distance.
Wow, that's deep resolution.
Yeah.
By the way, I can say that I was also dumped by email by the age of 19.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm glad we both recovered and doing well.
Yes, there we go.
And talking
From heartbreak
about
to analysis,
yeah, every heartbreak is an opportunity.
Yes.
What is the project or bot you're most proud of all the things you've done?
I think out of everything that I work at Salesforce, and at Salesforce we have the Einstein bot builder. So it's not that I'm necessarily producing chatbots myself, at least in my previous role. So when I was, started out on the Einstein bot builder, I started out as a user researcher and essentially was doing conversation design as part of my role. It just wasn't the primary focus of my role. And now I am primarily a conversation designer where sometimes I'll do some research on it. And the interesting piece about being, a UX professional on a chatbot builder platform is essentially like I get to be, rather than directly applying the linguistics for creating conversation designs that customers will experience directly, I get to be more of a teacher or more of a guide for anyone who is building a conversation design for themselves. And so I think the thing that I'm probably the proudest of on the Einstein bot builder, goodness, I think if it's just sort of like overall from a program level, all of the content that I produced around conversation design and sort of giving assets to our Salesforce administrators who are building bots, that is what I'm really proud of. I've had blog posts and reports and decks, anything that articulates, here's our point of view on conversation design and sort of democratizing linguistics for people who aren't necessarily as familiar with it. And then in terms of feature functionality, what I'm probably most proud of in the Einstein bot builder personally is that I was part of an effort to remove the term misspellings from the bot builder. So when I started, as I'm sure you're aware, when you're training a bot, particularly for natural language understanding, when it comes to intents, you have to train it with different phrases and different utterances in order for it to be able to essentially understand the customer, understand the user. Well, one of the things that was in the bot builder when I got on the team was the idea of normalizing your data. This is something that a data scientist would be familiar with, the idea that you have to sort of get rid of those sort of outlier spelling variations. And that framing that as misspellings is a way to kind of colloquially tell people like, hey, clean your data. I sort of took umbrage with that in the sense that when you have the term misspellings, the presumption or the presupposition there is that there is a right and a wrong way to spell something in language. And because we're talking about conversation, there's so much of your social identity that you very effectively encode in what you say and how you say it, especially in typed chat, that to sort of get rid of what we would consider a misspelling, A is to say that whatever spelling variation that user is using is wrong, because it's not considered standard, and then erasing their expression of their identity by then taking it out of the data set. And I sort of brought this up with my fellow UX designer, Molly Mahar, and she and I went to our product folks and content experience folks and stakeholders and said, hey, I think we should take misspellings, the term misspellings, out of the bot builder because we don't want to essentially make a judgment call on how people are using language. We want to encourage the robust training of the data set. So that way, if I'm spelling Y-A-S-S, yas, instead of yes, to try and sort of exude this part of my identity, then I want to make sure that the bot understands that. So I'm probably the proudest of that.
And the bot is like trying to fit himself in this kind of conversation? Like answer accordingly?
Or just be able to understand it. So like, for example, if I typed, like if the bot said, did I take care of everything for you? And I typed back to it, yes, because I was super excited about how good of a job the bot did. And I'm trying to sort of encode and express the intersection of my gay and POC identity in language, then yas is the word to use. Mm-hmm. And the worst response would be if the bot said, I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's essentially about trying to train the bot to be a better listener. So that way it can understand, like in the same way that you would for a voice product and you would train it on different accents and different pronunciations, all of those different characterizations come out in spelling in a text-based bot. And so you want to train it on those variations as well.
Being so deep into linguistics and into these contextualization cues, what is the one most important thing for every chatbot or voice assistant?
The most important thing, like from a building perspective, design perspective, training
from your perspective.
I think probably the most important thing from my perspective is, and I'm very biased here, but conversation design. I mean, I have to admit my bias here, but I truly think that because whether it's chat or voice. And I really think about sort of conversational experiences across a spectrum, where on one end you have text forward conversation, and on the other end you have voice centric conversation, where voice forward conversation is somewhere in the middle. And what I mean by all that is text forward conversation, the core of the experience really is around the text itself. And there might be some graphics like menus or images or carousels that you can essentially leverage to enhance the conversational experience, but that it's fundamentally at its core, it's about its text. And then voice-centric conversation, it's similar in that you might be having it on a computer or on a phone, and it's it might have some graphical elements where it's transcribing what the user or the system is saying, and have some other kind of cues, but that it's very much about the voice. And then on the farthest end, you have voice-centric conversation, where it might be something like an Alexa or Google Home, physical device, whereby there are very, very few, very limited visual cues, and it's pretty much solely on the voice that is the experience. And I think that given that the common thread across all of those is that conversation is now the UX. It's not necessarily the graphical design, it's the conversation design that is carrying the entire experience. And so if it can't understand yas, or if it, let's say, has a very, very short response delay from the bot, and so all of the instructions that come from a chatbot come with no pauses, and so it's just an onslaught of messages. Or if it's let's say a voice assistant, but you have designed it as a text bot, and so it reads out a menu of all these things that it can do. All of those things aren't necessarily the best, sort of experience, and it's going to impede the user's trust in the system to actually get the usability factor across, to actually accomplish a task. And so I think in that regard, it's really about, and at Salesforce, our number one, value is trust and customer trust. And so in order to enable and encourage trust with users, it's I think very important to get the conversation design precise and to get it strategic, because if not, then you sort of lack consistency and the usability starts to fail.
Was it something awkward, amazing, surprising, funny that happened to you while designing conversation or building the bots?
Ooh, something awkward or funny. I have to think about that one for a second. I think probably what comes to mind for me is, I am very much a nerd at heart. Like I grew up watching Godzilla movies and playing Pokemon games and all that kind of stuff. And so for me, I'm not a gamer. I don't call myself a gamer because I'm not that I don't play that many video games, but I am a sucker for a good Easter egg. And so what I like to do sometimes, if I'm doing some kind of conversation design vision for a product, now in my conversation design role at Salesforce, I like to drop little Easter eggs in there. So for example, maybe, if I'm doing some sort of POC for something or a vision prototype, then maybe the name of one of the participants is a reference to some sort of media thing that I like. And so very recently I did a vision demo for a voice product that we're working on. And what I did for the systems, it's very important for me to kind of convey the system's processing sound, or that the system is essentially taking time to accomplish a task. And it's a tough balance to strike, because in English, at least in American English conversation, if you take a pause that's longer than about a second, then it's essentially a predictor or a signifier. They found Anita Pomerantz discovered this in 1984. She's also a conversation analyst, that it's sort of like a precursor for a negative response. It indicates that maybe some trouble is coming in the conversation. And so we want to make sure that for a voice interaction, if it's taking longer than a second for a pause, that we fill it somehow with something. And so I saw a thread on Twitter recently that said, if you're calling into one of these more natural IVRs where you can just kind of speak aloud rather than pressing 1 to advance throughout a menu, that the users found it disingenuous if it sounded like the machine was typing because it's not human. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do a demo or I'm going to do a vision design and I want to, fill the pause with something. So what I decided to do is I decided to put in a little Easter egg, and I put in, if you're familiar with playing the original Pokemon games from the 90s, when you go to the Pokemon Center and you want to heal your Pokemon, and it's like that click, 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 the Pokeballs, they fall into the slots, and it's like dun 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 dun. See, I sang for you.
And
That
my kid is actually playing Pokemon Go nowadays.
There you go. Yeah, and so when it's healing the Pokemon, I use that 8-bit tone to essentially like give that like, okay, I'm processing something for you.
Oh.
And I didn't tell anybody. I was like, I'm just gonna let people discover it and see how it works. And it's just for now, it's just for the sake of a placeholder. But that I think is like, I like to have fun with conversation design, and whether it's something that's a vision that we're just using it as a placeholder, or eventually for us to consider what's going to end up in the product, I like to draw a lot from my experiences with pop culture and what I enjoy in terms of Easter eggs to help make that a fun experience.
Okay. What advice can you give beginners or aspiring designers that see it and ask themselves, how can we get in?
Yeah, I think the first piece of advice I would give would be to, I think, start to mine the internet for different kind of communities that have to do with voice and conversation design as a whole. There are so many of them, whether it's CoCoHub or RoboCopy or the Voice Lunch. There's so many, or even the Chatbot and Voice Summit that's based out of Tel Aviv. There's so many different organizations, I think, right now that are producing content and bringing the conversation design community closer together. And so I would probably start there with some of those that I've mentioned. And then in terms of learning, I think, I'm pretty good friends with Hans, who is the CEO of RoboCopy or the Conversation Design Academy. Yes, he's great. I think that their content is great. I think that the vision for what he and his team are doing is really strong. And so I encourage folks to take a look at that material as well. And if especially learning the linguistics around it, I think that probably my favorite I call it pop linguistics, where it's like linguistics for non-linguists. It's not too difficult to grasp. My favorite go-to book is called That's Not What I Meant by Deborah Tannen, because it really, I think, and it's a pretty quick read too. Professor Tannen, she writes really accessibly, and so I think anybody can really understand it and grasp it and relate to it. And it's really talking about, it covers the nuances of conversational style and how that sort of materializes linguistically, and how that can essentially guide relationships through conversation. And I think that fundamentally is really what we're talking about achieving with voice and chat assistant.
What else do we need to know about Salesforce, your workplace?
Yeah, I think so. Salesforce is, I'm very, very, very privileged and grateful to work for Salesforce. It's a company that I think has really great values and is very much invested in customer success. We think about the customer first. And, our number one value is trust, yes. And I think that really comes down to, what are we doing to make sure that we're doing right by the customer? Not just because, it's the right thing to do, but also because trust with our company and trust with the customer also enables customer success at scale. And I think that, given everything that's going on in the world right now, I think that I'm very proud that Salesforce has taken a proactive stance to helping as many people as they can, whether that's getting PPE or thinking through safe mechanisms for returning to work, as well as thinking about its impact on the community around it. San Francisco is the home of Salesforce, and Salesforce very much, I think, is conscious about the footprint that it has on the city, and making sure to take care of not just the city itself, but also its people and people around the world. There's very much a culture of giving back through Salesforce. So I think that holistically through its offering in CRM, I think that Salesforce, the thing that I find really sort of inspiring about it is that it's about taking this technology that seems sort of like analytical and making it come alive for people so that we can actually change their lives and really help the world to make it a better place. So I think that that's Salesforce in a nutshell.
And before I let you go, some colleague that I won't reveal his name, Jason, urged me to ask you to sing something to us. So the stage is yours.
Well, so I feel like I filled that requirement already because I sang that Pokemon healing theme song. I have a feeling the reason why Jason asked that is because he recently posted something on LinkedIn about how conversation designers curate their portfolio. So like UX designers, they'll have some, because it's a graphical UI, it's kind of easy to sort of collate a portfolio like that. Because conversation, it's dynamic. And so something like a chat or a voice UI is going to be more difficult to collate. I kind of thought I'd be a little facetious and I left him a comment saying, well, I put all of my portfolio on a record. So like my record will drop and you can listen to my album or whatever next week. And that's where all my conversation designs are. Because one of my hobbies is songwriting. And so I suspect that's probably where his request came from. That said, like as a songwriter, I very much think of myself as a lyricist, not a vocalist.
Yeah.
So I try to get other people to sing my records for me.
That's good enough for me.
Right.
So thank you a lot, Greg Bennett, Conversation Design Lead at Salesforce. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And for everybody watching, don't forget to check out our hub at CoCoHub.ai, the place to build, expand, improve, and test your conversational components. Take care. Bye-bye.